Hi, I'm Hauswerks. Welcome to my studio here in Leeds at New Concept Studios. I'm here to take you through the creation process of my recent remix of Groove Armada's I See You Baby.
Shaking ass, shaking ass, shaking ass, shaking ass, I see you baby, shaking ass, shaking ass, shaking ass, I see you baby, shaking ass, shaking ass, shaking ass.
So after speaking to Groove Armada and the guys at Moda Black, and I chose I See You Baby to remix because it's one of my favourite old electronic dance music records. We had a bit of an issue with the original was done that long ago on the old DAT tape that all they had was the vocal stem, so none of the original samples kind of remained. So I went back into the original, which I've loaded up into the page for you here, just to have a run through because I was pretty confident there was a lot that I could take from the original track itself and use in my my remix. For instance, the warpy sounds, which everyone knows and loves and was one of my favourite elements. We have there on the original track that's dry and clean.
I see you, baby.
So it's easy enough for me to just kind of snip those bits out. If we zoom in there, you can see they're dead clean, nice and easy. Take them out, and they're ready to utilise. Yeah, so once I realised there was enough there for me to work with, I kind of then went about having a think about how to approach the remix itself. And I kind of had two ideas really. One of them was to kind of pay a homage to the original because I liked it so much, and it was quite an honour to get to remix it, to be honest. So and I was very limited with my time. I think I only had 2 or 3 weeks I was given to do the remix and complete it. So I went with the first idea of a homage to the original and just kind of update it and beef it up and bring it up a little bit up to date. So I completed that, handed it in, everyone was really happy with it, they liked it. But then there was a bit of a hold up their end, and I was given another month or so to try a new idea. So this is what I'm going to show you today. And it's a little bit more current, a little bit more me, a bit less of the original, but as much, and trying to keep that original kind of grungy vibe to it, but bringing it up to date for the dance floor of today. So this is how I go about the process. At the beginning, I always start with a section, a little basic loop at the beginning, where I'll start building the groove, as you can see here. This is where I'll get all the elements ready in preparation to start the arrangement. But I won't start that until I have the core basis of a decent groove, a solid idea going. So what I'll do is I'll go through depending on the style and the idea that I've decided to go with, I'll go through my sample collections and I'll go through the whole database that I've built up over the last 15 years of producing. And I'll pick out sounds and relevant ideas and hits and stabs and loops and things that I'll be willing to work with for this particular track. So, for instance, little dubby hits. I like to build up kind of one shots. I mean, I use loops a lot, but I don't use them as they are. Usually I kind of chop bits out, little sounds that I like. Yeah, a lot of people like to then spend time building up the banks and the XSS, and then they've got the full control over the keyboard spread. But I love working with audio. I always have since I started using Acid Pro in 1999 or something like that. I like to be able to see and shape and manipulate audio as it is on the arrange page, which by the end of it looks ridiculously messy. I've tidied up this one for you. It's not normally this neat and arranged, I can tell you that. But yeah, it's just something I get from the visual aspect as well, of knowing and seeing where everything is that I like to work with. For instance, sound selection. What might seem like insignificant little tiny dubby hits, which would have actually been taken from, if I stretch out the sample and play that to you, for you. You know, it's just a random weird little dubby. But I like the crunchy, raw, kind of unshiny, well, not polished sound to it. And I'll build several of these up. You know. So if we remove the hat there and just give you an idea of some of the just random little hits. I mean, in here, this is a section where it's kind of grouped and folded, but in there you'll see there's also just random little hits from loops that I like. And I start to build a groove from there. If I drop the kick drum in, you can see it's got a bit of a rhythm going to it now. And it sounds very raw and unpolished and cut, and sometimes I even purposely leave the clicks on the end of an audio file or the crackles or things like that, because I think it just gives it character. Obviously sometimes it sounds massively wrong, but if you judge it right, I think it gives it that old dubby kind of character. The very first stage, I guess, would be the choosing of the kick drum. The kick drum's so important; it sets the scene and the vibe of the whole track. Really, it's like if you get your shiny, poppy kind of deep house kick drums, which have like a little pop on the top end transients and a nice rounded warm bottom end. Whereas I'm a bit more of a kind of rough cut, fuddy sounding kick, as you can hear. Like it's quite tech, and that in turn will then suit the kind of vibe of all the rough cut, chopped, dubby samples and everything. Because if I put a shiny, poppy, deep house kit in with all of those rough cut samples, it's just not going to gel together properly. So you can see. And then as I'm adding these sounds and chopping and creating on a loop, and I'm constantly getting ideas of what to come in next, so I kind of like work on the fly pretty quickly, not doing too much processing to start with, just to get in the zone and kind of go on a roll. So we've got it going there. So then I'd, add some top ends, some hats, all little hits. Clap in there. As you can see, that's now starting to sound like a fuller loop and a track itself. And I keep building on this with some more tops until it's sort of, I kind of wanted that shaky kind of vibe to it. So we've got some little tingy hats in there. Some more shakers in there. A bit more of an aggressive hat. And that now is all starting to sound together and kind of come together. And although it's used loops in it, it's not how they are. I've kind of created my own loop from it. And then the next stage would be to get this percussion and this all sounding tight together, because without any processing, it would sound a little bit bits and pieces-ish and a bit disjointed. So I use a lot of effects, generally EQing and stereo spreaders. If you can see here, down here, where everything's soloed. Majority of things will have an EQ, whether it's a bass cut or a bit of a treble boost. And on the kick drum here, I've got a bit of a drum kit compressor, which is one of the in-house ones in Logic, which I can show you the difference. It's kind of adding just that extra little bit of punch and a little bit more depth to it. So you can see how much it's working on there. And control it with the threshold and the ratio down at the bottom there. So that's just to make sure the kick's pumping through as much as it possibly can. Like I say, a lot of the samples and things I use are from, say, old hip-hop tracks or old breaks records, and they're completely different BPMs and they're completely different styles. But when I'm building with one-shots, so like this, I'm kind of creating my own one-shots out of their loops. I don't have to worry too much about the timing of the original, because I'm just chopping out that one little individual hit, as I showed you earlier, and I can show you again here. Say this dub hit here is actually a little single hit out of a part of another loop we've got going there. But all I wanted was the rough sounding little tom, which sounds quite insignificant on its own. You might think, where's that, but the sound it's come from, and it just all adds to the vibe of the track. So I don't have to worry too much about the timing on that. But if there is a loop that needs timing up, then Logic's got a great easy function for time stretching, which I'll show you shortly. I can show you on this kick drum here. Was completely out of time, and that was a 2-bar loop there. If I take the automation off and zoom in for you. Logic has a great new function in Logic 10 as well. If you grab the bottom hand corner of an audio file, keep your finger on Alt, and then you can stretch that, and you can see exactly where it should go. And if it's been cut properly as a loop, then you know it's 2 bars, then you can just drag that to there, and boom, it's in time. And this kick drum's actually one from a bank of mine that I've kind of created over the years, and ones that suit particular styles of tracks. I'll generally have kind of 4 or 5 favourite kick drums depending on the style of the track as to which one I'll use, but I'll know they're all tried and tested in clubs, and they all work well for me. I think if most producers will have their continuous favourite samples that they'll use for continuity. Quantizing, I mean, I never use quantize pretty much ever. I mean, if I'm inputting data via MIDI on the keyboard spread, then I generally do it, note at a time, or if I'm playing it in and record it. But with the audio, what helps me get my kind of shuffles and my grooves and not having everything too rigid, because I don't like stuff that sounds rigid, like bang on 16ths. I will actually zoom in And say like this dub noise hit here, you can see is way off the mark compared to that one there. And to release the quantize, if you grab a sound and keep your finger on control, then rather than taking it from bar to bar, you can move it wherever you want. And I'll roughly put it, knowing from experience how far away and how much swing, but nothing will have exactly the same amount of swing on. So everything will be a tiny bits out, but you won't notice it, but it'll give it that more loose, live, kind of shaky vibe. I'll do that across the board with everything, pretty much. I mean, if it's not on the 8th or on the kick, like that, we can zoom in there, there's another little hit there, that's slightly off the 16th, but I would have done that manually here, like this, without any quantize, just to roughly how much swing I want on it, knowing how it's going to sound just by seeing it. And the other one on the 16th at the end there is already quite a bit off, so I've left that there, no need to move that. But with everything not synced up and so tight and rigid, which is important for some types of music, but for my kind of loose, shaky vibes, it all comes together and it kind of rolls without being too So once all the percussion and everything is crunchy and how I've got it sounding, I generally send it to a bus, which if have a look here at the house hats, it's on. There you can see it's sent to bus 4, which is on here. So if I mute solo bus 4, that's the majority of my percussion is all sent to bus 4. And on there, I have a saturator, I've got a reverb, I've got a stereo imager, another reverb, delay, and effects reverb as well, all going here. So, because all the samples are sourced from different places and different cuts and different they've all got different sounds to them. Once you group them all and put them here together and crunch them all together, they all start to sound like it's one loop rather than bits and bobs. If I mute for you the cruncher, you can hear how much extra top and mid that's giving it. And you can edit that there and here. Stereo imager here, so I can turn that off. I'm not sure, it might be hard for you guys to pick up on the camera, but it's all fairly narrow. And that just gives it, I mean, there's a little image display here if I stereoize off. And it wants to be flickering with outside these lines. I mean, on the master, I want the core of the signal and the bottom end and the strength to be fairly central, and then all the effects and tops and things coming around it to give everything its own stereo space and fill up the stereo field. So that's great for that. I mean, even if you just use it as a slight tweak, it can make a massive difference to the space in the mix, and other sounds will have a space then to shine through and do their thing. Added a little touch of reverb on there as well to tie it together. So that's everything sitting together. So yeah, once I've got a bit of a percussion vibe going there, I'll move on to the next phase, which would usually be bass line for me. Now, having chopped out all the parts I wanted to use from the original and knowing how it goes and the spacing of the warps and things like that, that kind of bared in influence on the kind of bass line that I wanted. I wanted kind of subby, groovy, but bumping and rolling kind of bass line. And some movement in it as well between the wows of the original and the warps and the effects, just to kind of tie it all together. And one of my favourite machines for creating these sub bass lines is the sub boom bass, quite aptly named, I think you will agree. So I'll start. I've got 3 here, so let me just mute those for you. I think with this one I actually started with a bit of a hooker. Which, as a preset, if I was to mute everything on my channel, it sounds quite tame and preset-y. You know, it's quite hollow and woody, but I wanted something, again, that fits in with the raw dubby vibe, so I've kind of chunked it off with a rack of various effects here. And this is one of my favourite ones for beefing things up. It's the T-Racks here. It's got a few settings like the FM broadcast or old stuff that you can tweak. And just that alone, you can hear the difference. It's given it that kind of distortion and that old feel already. and then an EQ here, which I've wanted to put a little spike on the little bell sounding tone within the bass line. So I could kind of pinpoint its frequency level here on the spectral analyzer and give it a little boost there. You can hear the difference. I've removed any unwanted frequencies below 50 Hertz and given it a little boost around 100 to give it a bit more warmth and the punch. And then again boosted that little tone there because I think that pops through really nice in the percussion. So there I have the basis and the starting of the bass line and the groove, and from listening to that on a loop, when I'm in the zone, I then start getting ideas of how the sub should go underneath it. So then I'll load up another one with an appropriate sound, which I like, which is actually like a combination of an Udo drum and a sine sub on this one. Quite often when I use such things, I'll remove the Udo drum sound and just use the warm sine on the bottom. But I found with this one, in with the percussion and with the other bass that I've showed you, and some of these one-shot hits here, kind of added a nice little click to it, a different kind of frequency and transient, which I thought, yeah, that sits in there quite nicely, so I let it sit there. So that, yeah, there's the notes for the hook, which is all flat there on G sharp, as you see, and then the sub, I had it kind of following it, bouncing off it, but then a raised section here just to give it a little lift. And I knew as well from the effects from the original, which is going to be coming in here, that would kind of bounce off the warpy sound. So together we've got so it's starting to groove along nicely now. But what I will say is, after the one shots and all the rough dubby hits I was speaking about a minute ago, I do quite often like to just stick a crunchy loop in together in the background of it to kind of to tie it all together. For instance, this sound here, which originally would have been a part of a bigger loop that I've just kind of taken and looped a 2-beat section of. EQ'd all the bottom end out of it there, as you can see, because I literally just wanted it for its crunchy tops. I like the sound of its mids and tops. It fits in nicely with what I was doing. And another loop, which is really rolling. And again, it's got that real crunchy tops, the same kind of crunch so that, you know, they're all in the same kind of frequency zone. They sit together nicely. And on this one, I've put a sample delay on, which basically just sets it apart, gives it a little bit of width. Like you delay the left by like 101 milliseconds or the right, and you'll notice the difference if you're listening to this on a stereo system. That's all down the middle, and then that just spreads it all wide. And because I don't want these loops to be stand out significant, they're all kind of merging loops, so it's nice to give one or two of them just a real bit of width for everything else to sit and give its own space. So click them all together. So at this stage, I've kind of got a groove and a bit of a vibe going that I'm kind of happy to pursue. So I started utilising and bringing in more of the original samples. And a lot of these I've already processed and chopped from the first take of the original that I mentioned. That was more of a homage to the original. So I've just bounced them as audio and brought them back in, ready to use as a new stem. And when you're processing and chopping bits out of the original as well, as you go along, you'll have little what we call happy accidents, and you'll discover little bits of audio or little snippets or something that's like, oh, that's cool, that you wouldn't normally think of. Like in the background, I've got that, which literally was just the tail end of one of the vocal bits that accidentally looped, and I heard that on the first beat, and I thought, oh, that's cool. So I kind of chopped that bit out, put it on its own channel, and used that running in the background. Hear that? All these little extras just give you a bit of depth and texture and a bit of familiarity out of the original starting to pop in. So yeah, once I've got my little groove going, and I'm quite happy with the vibe and the direction it's heading, then I'll try experimenting still at the start of the project here, as you can see, before the arrangement, which starts later on. Little ideas for breakdowns, or I'll just give it like a little break so I can hear what it's going to kick in like and see if that's going to have enough power and I've got enough to work with to start the arrangement. So I've got some effects here that I've previously made on another project, a completely non-house project, which I've then transferred into here and time stretched and got to fit various effects like this zapper here, crazy analog effects building underneath. Because the original is very, I don't know, it's from the era of Chemical Brothers that I used to love as well, and I like all their effects and all the way that they bring things in, and I wanted to kind of keep it sounding old and in that vibe. Don't lose the original kind of vibe that Groove Armada had in theirs, which was quite grungy and underground. Because obviously, I mean, it shot to fame with the Fatboy Slim remix, but every time I talk about the original, I'm on about the original, which to me was really cool. So I'll start a little breakdown as we go in here. Decided some bottom end in the breakdown, some little bass hits. Again, that's from the sub boom bass with some massive distortion, but taking out the real bottom end, which sounds nice. Sounds a bit rubbish on its own, to be honest, but a lot of the sounds do. But when you merge them in with everything else, you get just kind of adds a little bit of tension and anticipation along with the effects that are rising up.
I see you, baby.
As you can see, that's where I've started playing with all the original parts will start coming in there. I mean, the first thing you heard there was the vocal, and that was I took a snippet of the vocal and pitched it down 5 or 6 semitones, I think it was, in the vocal transformer in Logic, which I can show you here. This is the original vocal stem. I've got the scent.
You baby,
Ooh.
shaking that ass,
A little bit loud.
shaking that ass, shaking that ass.
And it was just the in-house Logic vocal transformer I used here.
You baby.
Just to get that pitch down effect, which I know is quite obvious and done a lot in deep house and things, but sometimes with a vocal and it sounds really good, then I'm willing to keep it.
I see you, baby.
And I really like the sound of that. I thought that was cool. So I've utilised that and rolled into the original. These are all the parts here that I've chopped out previously from the original being down here. As I explained earlier, I went through the track and snipped out percussion bits or warps or little edits and things that they couldn't provide because they only had the vocal sample, and I've started to put them all together up here. And then we get the loop for the breakdown. With the vocals and the effects together, I thought it started sounding quite nice. So yeah, it was obviously I wouldn't have initially gone straight into this. There would have been a lot of process of trial and error with other samples or other effects and that didn't quite work. And this is what I've narrowed it down to working after some trial and error, should we say?
I see you, baby.
So yeah, that was all coming together, and I was quite happy with the builds and the way the effects were sitting with the original parts. I think I got that all sounding quite nice, and the energy was there and the vibe that I wanted. So yeah, it's all starting to come together nicely as a track. So it's at this stage I'll start thinking about the arrangement process. And this is the bit where so many people I know who make tracks kind of come to me for advice or struggle with, because you can get the loop going at the beginning and be happy with like an 8-bar loop, and you'd be vibing off that, sat here muting and unmuting like it's the best thing ever, like I've been doing late at night. And then, but it's another thing turning that then kind of 15 seconds into a 7-minute track. And that's an art form all on its own, I believe. I shall start here. I should notice at the top here I've got a channel that says kick, which is muted, constantly muted. That's actually there just as a sidechain trigger. Now sidechain, for all those who didn't know, is, well, it's essential. I use it pretty much every track, particularly for my subby bass lines and the kick drums, in order for them not to clash and there be a bit of an overload on the real subby weight and start sounding a bit muddy. I send my bass line on a bus to a compressor, which then the sidechain feature at the top here is on audio 1, which is the kick drum here, which is muted, so I don't want to hear the kick drum. If you go in, you'll see it's just in the usual place a kick drum is, but it's purely using it to trigger. So if I was to show you this, it's hard to hear it pick it up, but if I was to really extremely, it's starting to distort there, but the notes that hit on the kick drum are ducking out, and then it's jumping out after that. So we're letting the kick have its space to do its thing, and then the bass is kind of coming out and evolving from the kick drum there. And that's essential if you're ever having problems with a real weighty kick drum and using a sub bass, and you're layering them, and you just can't get the kick fat enough and the bass fat enough at the same time, then you need to be sidechaining it. That's what the channel at the top there was, in case you're wondering. I also do it at 32 beats in length and folder it up, and it doubles up then as a little marker for me and a timer. So I know where I am in a track. Whenever at any point I just have a glance up and I know roughly, that's a 30 seconds, that's 30 seconds, so it's going to be your minute drop. So it's handy to have it there. So starting the arrange. As with the majority of my tracks and the majority of club tracks it is, and we try and keep it DJ friendly but still kind of distinctive and recognisable from the start. So I start with the basics of the loop that I got going earlier on. I like to start with the majority of all the loops all together, so it's rolling from the off rather than build it too much, because I just like things going straight from the beginning. But I forgot to mention the backing noise. I like to put this in a lot of my tracks that, again, sound old and rough cut, and particularly when I've taken samples like from the original track of I See You Baby there, because there was a lot of noise and things in it. So I purposely put background noise in a lot of my records, if you can hear that. And it, again, just gives it that old vibe and keeps it in that kind of... It makes it almost sound like it's recorded off an old record or something like that. I just like the character that it brings to the track. So I'll have that running through literally the whole way without any edits or anything through the breakdown and everything. So it's almost as if you're playing it off vinyl. It gets lost in the percussion and everything, but there are moments when it comes back through and it just ties things together and gives it that character, as I say. So, as you can see, I'll start there. I quite often like to start just as a little feature or as a little change up there. You'll notice the kick drum with some automation on here, and that's to automate the bottom end here off the kick. So it starts off just more quite soft and light, and then after 30 seconds you bring it in and it steps it up a level. There's little tricks and things like that you can do as you're going along, and automation becomes very important when you've got loopy tracks to make them interesting all the way through. It's kind of all the movements and these little extras and attentions to detail that kind of make the difference. At the end of every kind of 30 seconds or 15 and 30 seconds, I'll do a little edit as we have here. Just quite a simple drop of some of the snips of vocal out of the original that I've got here. You can always hear the noisy recording that's had from like 15 years ago or wherever. But again, if I put my background noise on with it, it almost kind of helps it and ties it together. So yeah, you don't notice something like if this was all stripped back and quite shiny, and then that sample came in, it would be like, oh, that sounds awful. But because everything else I've done is quite rough cut and EQ'd and crunched, then I can bring and utilize those samples, and it sounds like it's part of the track rather than jumping out in a different kind of sonic field. So yeah, that's at the 1 minute point where I quite often like to go into a little drop. Either that or you bring the bass line in and you want to carry on mixing. But for this one, because there was so much character and so many samples and things I wanted to use from the original, I wanted to kind of give it a bit of a taster of some of the original samples, because you've not heard them yet in the intro. And that be the point where people go, I remember this on the dance floor, hopefully.
I see you, baby.
So in the breakdown, to keep it interesting, I've got some of the effects that I mentioned earlier. I've got some of the little vocal stabs that I've taken, which was the accidental ones that you come across. And I've also got the original percussion here, which was kind of a tribally loop with effects on here. Now if you listen to the original from many a year ago, that's the percussion loop from there. And I've kept little elements of these and just purely used them as effects and backing, just to keep, again, the vibe of the original. You'll notice as I go along the track, it's pretty much just in the breaks as an effect and to help the builds. So that's the first time I'll introduce the original effects sounds, which for me is the main hook of the track, really, that alongside the vocal. So to start with, I didn't want to bring everything in, I just wanted a bit of a teaser, but enough for people to get excited about. So I've just started with the and they're nice and spaced out there as well, so it's not too going off to start with. It's kept the groove, and you'll notice the rise in the sub will kind of bounce off that. So at this point it wants enough for people to be able to get the groove on, but without revealing too much that you've got nothing else to do later on. When I come to do the arrangement, I'm generally quite in the zone and I'm vibing off what's going on, and I'll whiz through really quickly and get a rough structure of what's going to come where. And it'll sound terrible at the end because I've just whizzed through, but then I'll know what's coming in where, and I can go in and do what I call the tarting up towards the end and put all the little attention to details and the fills. And it's really in the last 2 hours of making the track for me where it all comes together and it starts to sound together and proper. But up until then, I kind of whiz through the structure, and just as I'm listening to it, I mean, I'll be adding blocks and big sections as it's playing, thinking this will come, and then adding stuff in before it's got there, and then, you know, I'll vibe off it to the point, and I'm quick enough now in Logic that I can arrange it as it's playing almost. I see you, baby! These were cool, really cool, I thought, sounding effects from the original. Again, I couldn't get sent clean. You'll hear the original percussion loop in the background there again, which I haven't used throughout my track, but I've used it in breakdowns as an effect. And it was all about the little sine tone in there that they've got, which I could have spent hours and hours trying to recreate, but because of the style that I've done it in, it was good enough to just chop it and EQ it and get it sitting in there. I see you, and after quite a little drop down there, which is quite intense in terms of what's going on, we've got all the effects and the builds and the vocal and the chops. Then I like to just drop it down again to kind of raw groove, because it almost sounds fresh again after such a hectic little drop down. And just dropping down to the raw beats again, for me, it sounds nice and chunky with just simply adding some rides, which I've done here. You can see that's just a one-shot sample that I've kind of patterned up myself here. And then originally it was quite a big, thick 909 ride, was it? But I just really wanted to use just the top ting, so I've EQ'd out all the bottom end. I've just left the tops. I put a bit of a compressor on it, and again this sample delay, just a tiny bit, just to give it a little bit more width again, to sit over the top of everything rather than fight down the middle. And for me, that was enough to add after a busy drop. Set it going again. I see you, Cool, yeah, so we move on into the arrangement, and then I've got a bit of a mini build section here, keeping everything going, just EQing out some of the bottom end. I do believe, yeah, here on the master channel, I have an EQ as one of the first things there, and then in sections and builds and drops, I like to start EQing out some of the bottom end, so when it kicks back in, it's got the impact again and that warmth in the club. It really works. See it moving down here, correlating with here. I see you, baby. Shaking that ass. Shaking that ass. And that's the first time the vocal comes in for full, which is, again, one of the things this track is all about. And the moment, hopefully, people are going to go, whoa, it's this track. Yeah, I used to love this. So just can't try and emphasize that point. I've put in the background some crowd noises and cheering, which, again, I've got banks of and created and bounced and over the years. If I solo it and play it here. So we can hear there, sounds like everyone's having a lovely time. So yeah, if I put that quietly and just put a bit of spread and reverb on it, behind it, we're working with the vocal and the snare builds, it creates a bit of a moment. Hear it there. And also, if you're playing in a really empty club, you can pretend it's going off big time. It's brilliant. Okay, so leading into the breakdown. I've decided to do quite a long breakdown for this because there was a lot of samples I wanted to utilise, and I've got all my effects going, and I wanted to kind of keep it rolling as such, which is why you'll hear I've got a lot of percussion going, because I didn't want a full breakdown into a silence moment. I wanted to keep the groove and the vibe going, but utilising more parts of the original and some crazy effects. You can hear the break. I've got that little bass line going there, which doesn't sound significant, but with everything else.
But see, I need a little more volume, you know what I'm saying?
I see you, baby.
And we have an array of effects here that I've got going, which are kind of all building the vibe and the tension at the same time, as well as the parts from the original. Just play that through for you again there, because it's kind of got a bit of a peak there where you introduce again the warpy sound, which I wanted to be a bit of a moment before then building up to the bigger moment. And behind the original warps that we've got going on from that everyone recognises, I've kind of created a bit of a zapper here to kind of work with them in the background. So if I play the two together, got that one building up behind. And then slowly building up the vocal and some of the effects on channel 4 here. For instance, I've got the reverb, which plays on this sweep setting, which on the bus with all the percussion on. If I play that, if I put it on extreme for you, creates a really cool effect. Just to add there in the background, swirling around again, adding to the tension and the effect of the build-up.
I see you, baby.
Just hear it. Kind of wish-washy in the background there. Got more effects building up here. Again, the crowd noise slowly getting louder there.
I see you, baby.
So for the main drop, that's the first point where I have the warps from the original and the shaking that ass vocal going constantly bouncing off each other. So that's kind of like the main point, the main impact and feature of the track. You'll notice there's a lot of automation. It's the build and the break and things like that generally takes the longest to get entirely right, especially when I was working with samples out of the original, like this warp here, and towards the end, you can see with the volume automation now, I've looped just the end section of that to come all the way down and then back up again towards the peak. But again, that's just utilising just a tiny note in the background, and you'll hear that. Which conveniently sits in with one of the samples I had to chop out of the original.
I see you, baby.
all sounds very rough cut and a bit cack on its own, but again, with everything else going on, it's all merged in nicely.
Shaking ass, shaking ass, shaking ass, shaking ass, shaking.
And the effects.
Shaking ass, shaking ass, shaking ass.
I see you, baby.
And then from there, it's really just how long you want to keep it going at its peak for, and then the outro towards the end, really. So kind of break it down.
I see you, baby.
Drop the vocal there, keep the warps going, keep the ride so it's still pumping it up. Moving on a section.
I see you, baby. Shaking that ass.
Little fill, drop the warps and the vocals back in. You'll notice there's another little edit there on the original warps that I did just to kind of as an ending point. That's the end of the warps here. Which was as simple as chopping one of these and, as I explained earlier, grabbing the corner and time stretching it to pretty much about double its size. And it's quite a cool effect just as an ending point.
I see you, baby. Shaking that ass. Shaking that ass.
So there we start to wind down. I've got the vocals more sporadically, start dropping out the rides until we get to the point. Back down to just beats and mixing territory, nice and DJ friendly. So that's the structure run through, and then it's after this point where I'd run through and do all the tiny little edits and the details, and this is where it all comes together. You know, little snare fills and trips, and just little things like putting a one note hit before it kicks in.
Shaking that ass.
Clever little dropouts here rather than at the end of a bar, which I like. You'll hear quite a lot in my tracks. I do a lot of edits, and rather than doing the edit at the end of the bar, introducing the section, I quite often do it at the beginning and drop out a few kicks as here.
I see you, baby.
And then back in. Little one-shot incidentals like the vocal hits there, and the breaks and the snare trips, which I have running throughout, which will have different varieties for different fills at the end.
I see you, baby.
I mean, there it's in a roll.
Shaking that ass. Shaking that ass. Shaking that ass.
But then earlier on, I'll use the same one just as an introduction. So as it goes along, I'll basically end up playing through the track like a million times before it's finished, never actually being really happy with it until I send it to someone and they say, no, leave it, it's good enough. Because in my eyes, you can always do more, it can always be better, but sometimes you can overwork it, so it's nice to have someone to reference to and say, no, that's sounding pretty spot on. Or walk away for a week from it then, but I didn't really have time to do that, and come back to it, and then you notice. But it's all the tiny little sparkling off, little finishing touches and edits that for me bring it to life and give it a bit of energy or a bit of distinction that people will recognise that it's something that I've done myself. By the time I finished it, I do a bang it out as a DJ master, so when I go and test it in the clubs before it's had a chance to be mastered by the labels and whatnot, it's going to stand up to everything else that has been mastered by the labels. So at the end of my chain, I'll have the Fabfilter limiter, and I'll have the T-Racks, because I'm so used to using the spectral analyzer on here. I know how my track should look visually on here at different sections. I know how much the bottom end should be, or if there's unwanted frequencies around the bottom end here. As you can see, the kick and everything is nicely around the 50 and not too much under that, which is kind of, you don't really need. It always peaks generally like that throughout the course of the track, and generally get the smiley face effect. And before that is one of my favourite recent plugins, the Izotope stuff. I don't know how I lived without it beforehand. In particular, the dynamics and the spreader here. If I've put this on quite an intense setting so you can hear the difference. Just the dynamics. So using it kind of as an EQ, you've got the option to limit or compress on here. But the great thing about it is its frequency. You've got 4 bands here, so you can hone in on a frequency, say it just needs a little sparkle on the top end. It's sounding a little bit muddy. Then I can boost. And you can adjust how far that range is going. obviously you've got to be careful not to go too extreme when you're doing it with the dynamics rather than the EQ, but just like a little touch of a couple of dB extra here and there, just really brings it to life for me. And then also, similarly, is the stereo imager, which is great, again, because I have 3 or 4 main ways of spreading sounds and filling the stereo field. I use the Own Boys delay, sometimes with the panning it left and right hard width, or I use the in-house stereo spread from Logic here, which kind of gives it a whole encompassing spread. Or there's the Izotope imager here, stereo imaging, which I find great because of its frequency-specific zones here. So I can keep the bottom end, or like the real low ends and the bass and the kick, tough and driving down the middle. So I don't affect that at all, but then just above at the 200 zones and then again bandwidth 3 and 4, I can give some real width. So you can kind of see from the imager there, you've got the core down the middle and everything else peaking and spreading around it there. If I can see that. You can hear it's all kind of gone a little bit tube and narrow. I'm not sure again if that's hard to pick up on the cameras, but that just pings it out there. And for the final mix, that's brilliant. Again, if you've been going along and spreading stuff as you've been creating, then you might not need to use it as dramatically as I have on this particular track. But as I say, I often just whiz through the structure and then go in and do the tightening up, and sometimes it's a little bit muddy and a bit narrow by the time I finish because I've just whizzed through on a roll. So then I go back in and attention to detail with these. And I also have one of those, as I mentioned earlier, on my percussion bus to make sure all the percussion and tops are nice and spread. So that together with a little bit of limiting there on the Fabfilter, you can see how much of the peak it's cutting off here. And now, although on the Logic output here, it always looks like it's brick walling it completely. You can see from here, it's not massively. It's just trimming off the tops, which is kind of where I want it. I mean, you can go hardball with it, but then you lose the dynamics, especially when vocals and things are involved. So for this stage, I just wanted to crunch it enough for it to stand up in the club against all the other tracks that I'm playing that have been mastered by the labels and their specific guys, and that was enough to do that. And then when I finish the track, I'll take off any mastering that's involved with limiting and compression, and obviously I'll pump it down. They usually ask for about -6 to -8 dB, and I'll send them a version with no mastering at all. They'll then go and get their own mastering done and send it back to me. I mean, sometimes I actually prefer my own. Sometimes the masterers take out a little bit too much of the weight of the bottom end, almost like they're mastering it for a compilation CD or something. Whereas I quite like the frequencies that make you feel sick in a club. I'm into them. So yeah, that's pretty much in a nutshell how I go about creating a track, and in particular remixing.